Today's talk is about the power of confidence, but what does that really mean in practice? A helpful question you might want to ask yourself is, what are the fears, anxiety, and worry that are holding me back from being all that I can be? Your confidence is the key that gives you a distinctive advantage. It's a subtle yet intangible difference that shows in everything you do, how you speak, and the presence you carry as a leader. I am so excited to introduce our guest, Christy DeSantis. Christy is currently the founder of Fiducia Coaching and focuses on empowering and sparking confidence as a source of professional growth. Prior to Fiducia, Christy served as a marketing and communications executive at Fortune 500 companies. Most recently, she was a vice president of marketing health solutions at WW, formerly Weight Watchers, and had leadership roles in iconic brands like Unilever. Christy, welcome. First question for you. Why is the topic of confidence, and particularly at work, because I think a lot of the folks here are focused on work, but personal as well, why is it so important?
Let's first level set on something and what confidence is versus what confidence isn't. Confidence isn't bravado, and someone who may seem very confident isn't always competent, right? I think we all have learned that. Confidence is really about our belief in our abilities. And that's meaningful because it can help propel us to make choices, to be decisive, to take chances, and more. And although often used interchangeably, self-esteem is a little bit different. They aren't the same exact thing. Self-esteem is belief in yourself, whereas confidence is belief in your abilities. And I'll be focusing, for the purposes of our chat today, on confidence and particularly how it relates to our professional worlds. And it's really interesting, but confidence at work has been a bit of a controversial subject at times, right? We've all seen articles and heard things that some say it isn't really an issue, others say it's only a problem because society and others create it for us. And I'm not here to say that we should place sole accountability on ourselves to solve the confidence problem, right? It isn't just about what's happening to people on the inside. There are certainly external factors that abound, right, that affect our confidence, and others should be held responsible to help fix it from a business perspective for why this is so important. And it relates to the bottom line as well as employee satisfaction and the health of the company overall. But we'll discuss a little bit of both today, both about personal confidence and as well as what leaders do and can do. And I'll expand a little bit on what Lan just mentioned. A lack of confidence can affect us in so many ways, right? It's everything from keeping us from applying for a promotion or asking for a raise, even though we know we deserve it, to speaking up and being more vocal in meetings. There are a variety of different studies out there. One of the studies that was conducted by a group called My Confidence Matters, which surveyed about 2,500 people, said that about 70% of people admitted to regularly lacking confidence in themselves when it comes to their careers and speaking up at work specifically. And that's seen across the board, regardless of your industry, sector, size of your business, or your job title. So if you think about that for a second, 70% is nearly 3 out of 4 people at work. So with that large portion of the workforce affected, it certainly means that business can ultimately be affected as well. And as Lan pointed out, that means certainly high performance is related to confidence. A lack of confidence can be associated with stress, and stress alone can cost a business over $300 billion a year. Indeed did some great research and showed that over 90% of workers said that they're likely to stay at a company if they felt confident in their roles. Supporting and boosting employee confidence is not only the right thing to do from a personal perspective, but it's also good for business. And that's just one piece of the pie when it comes to why it's important.
So before I ask your next question, I want to tie it to a hypothesis that I have, and excuse my French, but how tied is confidence to not giving a shit about what other people think? Because for me, I feel like my confidence came once I stopped caring what my boss thought about my performance. Or for me, it was just like I spent so much of my early 20s and even in my 30s caring so much and feeling like evaluated. And I think about my daughter as well, right? As she's 7 now, but her confidence is to the roof, right? She wants to do all these, be on American Idol and do all these things. And, I have to catch myself because I'll say something like, you need training, like the adult squashing people's dreams. And I think about like how for many of us, our confidence is squashed by other people's inputs. Like for me, going into corporate world and having bosses who gave bad feedback or they had low self-esteem and so they treated their staff a certain way. And so how much of that confidence is also, I guess, muting the noise from the outside?
Yeah, I think it plays a big part, right? And to your point, ultimately, when we have people around us who are supportive and who help elevate us and give us both constructive feedback, but also positive feedback, and remember to do so in balance, right? I think that can all help. I will stress one really important thing. And if you don't remember anything else from our chat today, I hope that you all really remember this one thing. Nobody has it all figured out, right? So despite how they may seem, everyone is constantly learning. Everyone has room for growth. It is okay not to have all of the answers. And we need to stop comparing ourselves to others because there is no one bar or standard to meet. And just because someone has a different experience or a different journey than yours doesn't make them better or smarter or more adept at their job than you. You get to determine your worth at the end of the day. And I think if we can remind ourselves of that, obviously there is this direct tie, as Lan is talking about, but you get the say on what you're worth and what you believe about yourself.
I love that. And David Hansen has a great quote, comparison is a thief of joy. Love that.
Absolutely.
And one of the things, pigging back to what you said about being careful of who you surround yourself with. As I've gotten older, like my bullshit meter is just so much more in tuned, where sometimes when you're around people who are insecure, they in turn will say things to undermine you as a person. And one of my favorite quotes is from Jim Rohn. We are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So accordingly, choose wisely. And I've always been very cautious, especially as I'm getting older, is to really hand select who I spend time with. And when I said one of my best friends is Mina Malik, who we both are good friends with. And these are the people who are just like, you can do it. Like you want to surround yourself with people who like breathe confidence, even though you shouldn't depend on that confidence from the outside. It's helpful when you have a posse or crew or tribe that is just believing in you, right? It makes that difference. So the other question I had for you is, what are some of the reasons why people, and especially women, lack confidence in the workplace and don't talk about it? Because you have to have a level of confidence in order to be that authentic and showing your flaws and your sometimes your lack of belief in yourself.
Yeah, there are so many barriers to high confidence. Stressful, unsupportive, toxic work environments are a huge reason for lack of confidence, and especially bad bosses, which is one you mentioned earlier, Lan. And you may have been penalized for things at work in the past, and that may have created this environment for you. Culture means a lot at work. And so I do think that's potentially a big barrier and a potential reason for lack of confidence. Another is that many people aren't confident because of the idea that everything they need to do has to be perfect, right? This idea of perfectionism is a huge killer of confidence. And those who experience it set unrealistically high, essentially unattainable goals for themselves. And when they don't achieve them, they criticize themselves for it and thus create this vicious cycle, right? It's one of the reasons why people don't like putting themselves outside of their comfort zone. They're worried they won't get it 100% right. And I think one of the ways to combat this is to shift our thinking to progress instead of perfection. And every time you achieve a small win and make progress towards your end goal, you feel good about yourself. That journey of small wins should be the focus versus being perfect. One of the reasons I personally struggled with confidence is also fear of failure, right? And this can come from our own self-limiting beliefs or from learned experience where a bad boss may have given us a bad performance review, etc. I think the good news is that failures often lead to better outcomes in the long term. So despite the fact that it's pretty traumatizing in the short term and it's very frustrating, you can always learn something which can be applied to the future. And the more risks we take, the better we get at doing it. There are a lot of risks that will turn into successes. And we realize very quickly that the world doesn't end just because we've made a mistake, right? And I love that, Lan, you keep bringing up quotes from people. I love the quote, "So far, you've survived 100% of your worst days." And I think that really rings true for me. One last point, I think for women in particular, all of this can be accompanied by feelings of having to adapt the way they show up at work, and that they have to act differently to fit in and be like one of the guys, if you will, that they can't show up as their authentic selves. And that can have a big impact too. I often refer to lack of confidence at work as a hidden barrier, right? We don't tend to talk about it much for lots of reasons, but there are a few that stand out for me. The first is that we can feel ashamed or don't feel that we can be vulnerable at work. For those of you who are interested in this, Brene Brown talks a lot about it. She's one of my favorites. She's one to follow and to read about more about vulnerability at work. It can be isolating, and we don't know if others are experiencing it, so we are hesitant to be vocal about it. And finally, I think we worry what others will think, to the connection you made earlier, that it will ultimately diminish our value in other people's eyes as well. So I think those are some of the reasons why we don't tend to talk about it much.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's really tied to authenticity as well. Because earlier in my career, there was a lot of times where I was the only, whether I was the only woman or I was the only woman of color. And I felt like I had to piggyback on what you said, be like the rest of the guys or the rest of the executive suite. And you had to be tough, you had to be strong, definitely not show emotions. And it's so interesting because now that I'm past that stage and I'm actually doing training and talking to people, the teams that, like, when you're looking at your direct reports or your staff, they want you to show vulnerability. They want you to show your weakness. When you show your imperfection, it allows others around you to show their imperfections, and it makes it okay. So one of the things I started doing in meetings is admitting, "Oh, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. Let's pivot," because it allowed everyone else to also make mistakes, that they didn't have to be perfect. And it's so difficult to be in an environment where perfection is the expectation. And so when I started moving into more of the startup world, where you're supposed to test, pivot, it was almost like you're going to fail and you want to fail, because the more you fail, the more you learn about your product. And it was such a different mindset, and it really changed my frame of thought. Marie, you have a great question. Do you want to unmute and ask your question? Because I think it plays perfectly to what Christy was asking.
That's almost, how do we learn from our mistakes if we're not allowed to be imperfect? And I find that nobody's perfect.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's this sort of fine line and balance, right, between being allowed to take risks and being allowed to fail versus trying to get everything 100% right all the time at work. And because, quite frankly, we get praised for being successful. There's a lot to be said about performance culture that still exists in companies today. I don't have everything figured out, to be perfectly honest. I think for me, what has worked well is, for every failure that I've had, I've tried to analyze and look at the journey of that failure. Which parts of it actually went okay and went well, and which parts of it didn't go well? And how can I then take that as a learning opportunity that I can describe to others as such, right? So maybe we didn't get the perfect result we hoped for. Maybe we didn't get all the way to bright, but here are the things along the way that got us some really important insights or information or things that we can now apply to a different project, right? So there's always something about a failure that was actually a success. So sometimes it's about reframing along the journey that helps to make it a little bit easier to swallow and also to present to people. I think the best leaders are the ones who encourage people to take the risk and fail, right? And be okay with it. And to praise people, particularly visibly in front of others, for trying to do something differently to change the course of the business, whatever it is that you do. And I hope that more leaders will start to take on that attitude. And I alluded to progress, not perfection earlier. I think more leaders are starting to believe in that, particularly if you work in the digital world and others, because you can't get everything done in a moment's time. And PS, we could work 24/7 and still not get everything done, right? And let alone perfectly. So that's just a couple thoughts. And Lan, please jump in if you have any thoughts as well.
Jalise has a great quote, "The world doesn't end just because you've made a mistake," which is so true. And I think the thing is, you can't grow and you can't learn unless you make mistakes and unless you failed, right? It's one of those things where that's the path, that is part of succeeding, is to be able to learn from your mistakes, right? And cultures that innovate, you have to create, like Google did this huge multi-year study, and they found that the most innovative teams were the ones where managers encouraged failure. It was created psychologically safe places for people to grow and learn. I used to be in the agency world. I know some of you guys were in marketing as well. And in the agency side, I remember being at McCann, and whenever something went wrong, everyone would always just say, "I could get fired over this." And that was like the tagline, like this fear, like I could get fired, the opposite of what Jalise was saying. Yeah, the world ends if you make a mistake. And I realized that there's some cultures of companies that are not going to change. And Jalise and I actually worked for a company that was similar to that, where it's like the Hunger Games, right? And where the culture is about competition. And you can't, as a person, come in and change that culture that's so ingrained. And sometimes you just have to leave and find cultures where it is psychologically safe, because it is difficult to change a culture once it's been so established, right? Or if you're in consulting or some of these other kind of fields where it's all about the client and you have to have this perfection, it's just a different environment. I think part of it is understanding yourself and how you work and what makes you feel authentically yourself, and finding a place that jives with that, right? Because I know I wouldn't do well in certain environments. And I think part of that is understanding yourself as well. So next question I have for you, Christy, let's take a moment to discuss imposter syndrome. So there's a lot of opinions on it. Do you think it's real? What can we do about it? There's also been opposing views on it as well from women of color, because I don't know if I've ever had a confidence issue. I've always known that I was competent, but it was my managers telling me I couldn't. Or I think about women of color or men of color or whatnot, who've been told that they are not equal to or whatnot, or if the playing field is not equal. Or you see someone who, and I think all of us have probably experienced this at some time, where someone who is not as qualified as you gets a promotion or gets that opportunity because they might know someone, or they might play golf with the CEO's son or whatnot. Let's take a moment to talk about imposter syndrome, because I know it's complicated.
Yeah, it is. And it is also, again, a bit controversial too, right? Imposter syndrome it's not officially a diagnosis per se, but it is recognized by psychologists as very real and a very specific form of self-doubt. People are afraid that they don't belong where they are, they feel undeserving of it, and that they'll be found out as a fraud. People with imposter syndrome most of the time worry about things like being disliked, appearing unattractive, outshining other people, or grabbing too much attention. Self-worth becomes dependent upon and defined by achievement. And again, you're right, Lan, there are people who say it's not our issue internally, imposter syndrome. It's not me. It's what how I appear to others, and what people around me consider value for my contribution specifically that affects me, right? That I'm not the imposter, but it's that others aren't valuing my contributions. I would say that this can be an internal struggle. It can be a product of your environment. I believe it's a little bit of all of these things at the end of the day. But I can honestly say from personal experience and from talking to hundreds of women informally over the years that It is real. And regardless of the reasons behind it or the causes of it, there are internal conflicts and struggles sometimes about believing in ourselves and thinking that we don't belong where we are. There are two journalists, Hattie Kay and Claire Shipman, who have been studying this for years and have interviewed some of the most powerful and influential women around the country and found that they experience it too. Everyone from Sheryl Sandberg to WNBA players, right? I love this example. So Meryl Streep, who is obviously one of the most widely recognized and celebrated actresses of our time, once said, "You think, why would anyone want to see me in a movie? And I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I even doing this?" Right? Now, that couldn't be the more perfect example of imposter syndrome, because this is someone who's clearly lauded for her incredible talent, and yet she doubts herself. I think there are so many examples of imposter syndrome out there. In terms of what we can do about it and to combat it if we do feel we're experiencing it, that part's tough. There is no quick fix solution from my perspective, but there are a few things you can do, I think, to bolster your belief in your abilities and to know why you are where you are. The most important one is to remind yourself of the strengths you possess and your achievements. We often neglect our past accomplishments as if the fact that they are in the past means they no longer count for whatever reason, and they definitely count. So two quick suggestions around this. The first is an exercise, and you can take this as some homework. Take 10 minutes and put yourself on a timer to just write down everything you've accomplished in your life and any and all successes, from learning to ride a bike or learning how to swim to receiving a college degree or a promotion at work or having kids or running a marathon, whatever it is. And you will quickly find that this list fills up a page and more in just 10 minutes. Hold on to that list and then each year add to it with what you've done most recently. And you can continue to see how your successes add up and that you have a lifetime of achievement to be proud of. And that's part of the reason why you are where you are. The second is to have what I call my #winning folder in my inbox, where you keep all those emails you get or messages you might get from people who've complimented you or your work, or have taken the time to say thank you to you for something you've done. Revisit those when you're having a tough moment to remind yourself of what you've achieved and how you've added value and that others have recognized it. It's another great way to bolster that belief that you do belong where you are.
Love that. Oh, so the next question that kind of comes with imposter syndrome is, so what can we do about it? Do you have tips, like practical tips? You mentioned the whole kind of writing the list as an example. Other tips that, in terms of how we can overcome it. I love that tip. If there are any more, because I think people like to have.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned really focusing on who you surround yourself with.
For
Anything
sure.
else? And also Josh has a really good one that's interrelated. Josh's question is, so how do you change or gain confidence when the lack of and the idea of perfectionism comes about from one's upbringing and how parents raised you? And I'm going to add to that, because being in an Asian household, we're taught not to talk about ourselves. We're taught, and that doesn't mean you don't lack confidence, but you're not in the corporate world. You're supposed to be talking about yourself and what you're accomplished. And this is why I deserve to be here.
Yeah.
I was brought up to say, you work hard, you put your head down, and success will come. Obviously, that's not the case in corporate America.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
how do you, and going back to Josh's question, how do you gain confidence and change who you are when you were brought up with this idea of perfectionism or modesty, right?
Yeah, so I'll try to address that one first. And I will tell you that it is fact that our upbringing and our habitual thinking has created what I equate to grooves in a record, right? We have wired our brain to habitually think a certain way. And there's somebody named Dr. Joe Dispenza, for any of you who haven't read him, heard him speak before. He's got a great book that talks about how you can rewire your thinking and rewire these habits that have been ingrained in us, from whether it's growing up and our upbringing to even our own self-limiting beliefs. I definitely recommend reading a bit more about him, but I'll give you one concrete example of what I've done. I have this inner self-critic that has come from perfectionism, upbringing, a lot of different factors. And at the end of every day, I tend to sit down and think about all the things I did terribly during the day, right? What I wish I had said, what mistakes I made, what I got wrong. So one of the tips I have is to encourage everybody to try something. And that is, at the end of the day, ask yourself the question, what went right today? Because if you reframe your thinking to focus on what you did well in your day instead of thinking about what went wrong, you can start to rewire your brain a bit and change that habitual thinking, that habitual negative talk, and start to think about the positives instead. So I'd love for everyone to go off and try that at the end of the day, to try and think about the questions differently, to quiet that inner critic by asking yourself, what did I do well today? And it doesn't come naturally. Trust me, it takes a lot of practice and a lot of time. But that's one of the ways that I've been working on overcoming it. A couple other tips. Find yourself a peer mentor. Most people see mentors as those who are more experienced than them or more senior to them, but a peer mentor can be just as helpful, and sometimes more so, since that person is often going through the same struggles you are at the same time. You and your peer mentor can really elevate each other, show each other that you're not alone, and really importantly, be authentic and truly open with each other, which you may not otherwise do with someone who's more senior as a mentor. I highly encourage you finding a peer mentor that you can trust, that you can speak with openly, and who can also hold up a mirror to you and say, hey, would you say that to me? Why are you criticizing yourself that way? You wouldn't tell me that, right? So they can also call you out a little bit when you're getting into that habitual thinking. I want to talk to you about what, Lan, you brought up before, and that's not being comfortable talking about ourselves. I was raised the same way, right? It takes practice and it takes time. But there's one way you can subtly build up that skill, and that's by starting with complimenting and elevating others around you, which also helps you build your own belief in yourself as a leader. And P.S., we are all leaders, regardless, no matter what your title is. Everybody on this call is a leader in some way, shape, or form. So think about that. Send an email to somebody's boss, letting them know how helpful that colleague has been. So when you share project updates with your manager or other leaders, illustrate examples of how specific people have done other things on the team that are creating success. So putting the spotlight on others can help you practice how to frame up accomplishments so that when it's your turn to do it for yourself, you may feel a bit more comfortable at it.
I love that. I love that tip. It's funny because when I talk to friends who, and it always inevitably happens, they start self-talking them out of situations. I'm not really qualified for that. And I pause and I'm like, what would you tell a friend? And they're like, I would tell them to go for it. I was like, okay.
That's right. That's right.
Sometimes it's so much easier. And I do this a lot because if you guys have seen my posts, I'm very positive, but a lot of that is for me too, because like I go through my own self-doubt, right? And so we sometimes need to be our own biggest cheerleaders, right?
Yep. And it's hard to do, right? That's where the peer mentor comes in, because they can help cheer you on as well. The last tip I'll give, and I use this regularly now, and that's to know your 3 things. And what do I mean by that? So one of our fears is having to talk about ourselves, and in particular, what we're good at, right? So what if I met the CEO of my company in an elevator and they asked me about myself? What would I say? What if I met Oprah in an elevator? What would I tell her? What would I say in my performance review? How do I introduce myself at a party or a networking event where I don't know any? It can be overwhelming. And can also create a lot of internal stress, because many of us feel like we don't want to brag. We don't want to sound aggressive. Women often are chided for that. So instead, you can have your pitch ready. What are the 3 most important things that you want people to know about you? And so by knowing that and practicing it, you feel much more confident in situations that might otherwise cause uncertainty, right? So when I introduce myself to somebody new, there are 3 things I tell them, right? One is I'm a storyteller with an inner science geek, right? That's my marketing background in healthcare. My purpose is to spark confidence in others. And the 3rd thing I tell people is that I don't have kids of my own. I don't have a family, and I made that choice consciously, and I'm really happy with it. But I'm the favorite aunt to a 6-year-old niece and a 9-year-old nephew, right? So I have that memorized in my brain because it makes it so much easier for me. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to say because I already know it. So having your sort of elevator pitch planned is great. It's a great tactic.
I love that, because as a founder, or if you're ever working in a startup, your pitch is so important. What's your 2-minute pitch and what's your elevator pitch? But we never do that for ourselves. And I recently posted about the importance of working on your personal brand, because too many people focus their entire lives working for their company's brand and promoting them. And especially for folks like us who have previously been in marketing, our whole lives is about marketing and building these brands. Or we're wearing logos from companies like Gucci, Nike, or whatever it is, but we never stop and look at our own personal brand. And so I have so many executives who, especially this past 2 years, got laid off suddenly, had worked at a job for 20 years. And they're like, I haven't been networking because I was just focused on the brand. I didn't work on my own personal brand. I didn't do all of these things. And so now, after 10, 20 years at one company, they're now starting to look at their personal brand. And for anyone who's on this call, what Christy said is so important. Know your brand, be able to promote yourself, because it's such an important part of career and life success. So I'm going to ask you an anonymous question from someone in the chat. What would be your advice for rebuilding confidence after having a narcissistic, abusive boss? So I think a lot of heads nodding in our Zoom room.
Yeah,
But I know for me, in my early 20s, I was at this agency, and one of my boss in our performance reviews was just saying, you're not a good writer. And he literally just said, you're not a good writer. And for years, I just didn't write. And for those that know me on LinkedIn, I write every day now. And I'm like, because I stopped giving a shit. I was like, I don't care if people don't think I'm a good writer. I'm going to write. But it's this whole notion of what can you, and it took me like 10, 15 years for me to start writing again. Yeah. What's your advice for rebuilding confidence after you've been gaslighted or had an abusive boss?
Yeah, this is probably the toughest of all, right? Because it's knocked us down a few pegs, and we take that criticism to be the end word, right? We believe that person is in a position of power for a reason, and then that position means that they're going to be right all the time. And so we listen to them. I think the first lesson is, at the end of the day, we have to remember that every single person we interact with, whether it's our boss or otherwise, is just a human being. And they have their own opinion, but it's not the only opinion out there. They are an N of one, as we say in science and research. The other important thing, I think, in terms of overcoming and rebuilding our confidence back is some of the things we talked about earlier, right? Start asking other people what they think, specific to the comments that were made. What do you think of my writing? Do you think I'm okay? Can I send you some samples of my work? I'd love to get input from other people, because sometimes somebody's having some self-doubt because they actually believed that it was true, and now that their bosses said it, they're really reinforcing for them. I think you need to get other opinions from other people about what was said. I think this is a great case, again, in terms of rebuilding confidence, is surrounding yourself with people who can be really helpful in guiding you, and to talk to your peer mentors or others about what's happened and be a little bit vulnerable. Because sometimes talking it out and saying it out loud, I once had a boss talk about narcissism. After reporting to that person for a while, I changed bosses and I got a promotion. And I saw my previous boss in the hallway, and that boss said to me, "Hey, congratulations on that promotion. We did it." And I was like, wait, what? we did. What are you talking about? Like, this is somebody who's so narcissistic, they're taking credit for my promotion. We're surrounded by this. And in the moment, I was like shocked. When I tell that story out loud to people, I realize how ridiculous it sounds. Sometimes we need to be a little bit vulnerable and talk to others about what we've been through, because either they've been through it themselves, and judging from the question and knowing how many bad bosses there are out there, I bet we've all experienced it. You got to find somebody you can trust to talk through it with, who can give not only empathy, but also some of their own ways that they've been dealing with bad bosses too. So I think surrounding yourself with people you can trust, that you can be vulnerable with, to talk it out. Sometimes you got to get it out of your head and just get it out in general with somebody else. Find a sounding board who can help you be realistic about that feedback. And then also seek feedback from others to see what they think too, so that you're not just relying on that one person.
Love that. I'm going to open it up. If anyone has a question, let me know in the comments, but I'm going to read a few comments from the chat, which are really awesome. Bridget Trusty, stop believing what they told you. Stop listening to anyone who does not have the ability to see your value or worth. We have Grace Brady, only you set your worth, not others. And Bridget, create your own advisory board of people who you can trust. And Tanya, character is who you are. Reputation is who other people think you are. Care more about your character than your reputation. Love that. What is a role that leaders and employers can play? And what can they do? And we have a lot of leaders on this call. What can we do to create a better environment for our employees?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here. To the people who talk about imposter syndrome not being an internal struggle, but rather the product of others, et cetera, I think there's a lot of value in that. Many companies still use performance culture as a way to try and get the most out of their employees. But what it really does is create an overly stressful and competitive workplace where many people feel they need to fight over promotions and outshine the people around them. And so I guess I would say, for those of you who are in a position of leadership or power in an organization that still has performance culture as a priority, how can employers better adapt their cultures to demonstrate how much they value their employees and value them working together collaboratively instead of creating this sort of toxic competitive culture, right? So I think shifting a mindset away from ratings and performance culture can help. I think another way leaders can drive improved confidence is by making their colleagues and their direct reports more visible to senior leadership and generously sharing their time with others. I know we're all busy. And like I said earlier, we could work 24/7, but setting aside time to meet with people virtually or otherwise makes them feel appreciated. Also, sharing feedback immediately with them, with both positive and constructive, can be really helpful to people to feel more confident, because you're taking time and investing in them. And finally, there's a lot to be said for the way that leaders act, right? If you want to establish trust with your employees and build confidence in them, they need to feel like they can bring their authentic selves to work. They need to feel heard and seen. So listening, and that starts at the top, is also really important from a leadership perspective, I think. If you're gonna get trust, you need to be a bit vulnerable and show your employees that it's okay to be authentic at work. So those are some of the things I think we could be thinking about as employers and leaders.
I think Christy deserves a round of applause. Round of applause for Christy. Woo-hoo!
Thanks, everyone. I'm so glad we shared this topic together. And thank you for all the great questions and great quotes and comments. You guys have been amazing.
This was a pretty confident group. I love it.
Keep it up.
Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.